This story is inspired by true events, but all names and details have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. I still remember the day I told her we wouldn't have to worry about a home. It was spring in Dallas, Texas. The air smelled of fresh rain, and the city lights shimmered like they were blessing our future. She looked at me with those hopeful eyes, and I said the words that made her smile wider than ever. "Don't worry, I already have a house. That won't be a problem." Back then, everything felt perfect. We were young, in love, and eager to start the so-called American dream. Marriage, stability, a place to call our own. It all sounded so simple. People always say that love conquers all, but no one talks about the arguments behind closed doors, the late-night silences, the pressure of bills stacking higher than the dreams we once shared. As the years went by, the cracks began to show. What started as little disagreements grew into storms of resentment. Words turned sharp, days turned cold, and slowly the warmth of our home turned into something else, something suffocating. Until one day, we both realized there was no love left to save. Divorce became the only way out. Walking into divorce court, I thought I knew what was at stake. She wanted the house. She was convinced it was her right, her share of the life we built together. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the truth about that house was something I'd kept hidden all along. But before I reveal the twist that changed everything, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and state in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. A story hidden in the shadows. I've often wondered how a single sentence can change the course of a life. For me, it was the night I told her, "Don't worry, I already have a house." At that moment, it wasn't just words. It was a promise, a symbol, a vision of the future we thought we were building together. And yet, hidden beneath those words was a truth I wasn't ready to share, a truth that would one day unravel everything. Back then, it felt harmless. She and I were standing at the edge of a new chapter. Marriage was on the horizon, and with it came the weight of expectations. In America, a house isn't just a place to sleep. It's proof you've made it. It's security, stability, a foundation for raising a family. It's the cornerstone of the American dream. And so when I told her the house was mine, her eyes filled with joy, with relief, as if I had just lifted the heaviest burden from her shoulders. But inside, I carried a secret. The house wasn't mine. It was rented. Every month, the check I wrote went not toward ownership, not toward equity or permanence, but toward someone else's mortgage. I convinced myself it didn't matter. After all, wasn't love supposed to conquer everything? Wasn't commitment more important than the fine print of a lease or the name on a deed? I silenced the voice in my head that whispered otherwise. I told myself I'd figure it out later, that maybe one day I'd turn that rented house into something more. But lies, even the ones we bury deep, have a way of resurfacing. They wait for the right moment to crawl out of the shadows and demand payment. Years later, I found myself standing in a divorce court, staring across the room at the woman who once believed in me more than anyone else. She wasn't looking at me with love anymore, but with a fire of betrayal. And the very words that once made her smile were now being dissected, questioned, thrown back in my face. She wanted the house. She wanted her share of what she believed we had built together. The silence in that courtroom was deafening when the truth surfaced. The judge's words cut sharper than any argument we'd ever had. Since the property was never owned, there is nothing to divide. In that instant, the lie I had carried all those years exploded into the open. I remember the look on her face. It wasn't just anger. It was devastation, the kind of devastation that comes not from losing a house, but from realizing the life you thought you were living was built on shifting sand. And that's why I'm telling this story. Not because I'm proud, because I'm not, but because I've learned that secrets don't stay buried, and the smallest untruths can grow into storms that tear everything apart. So, as you listen to my journey, the love, the arguments, the breaking point, and the twist that changed everything, I want you to reflect on your own story. Have you ever hidden something thinking it would never matter, only to realize it was the very thing that defined everything? Before we move forward, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and your state in the comments below. It always amazes me how stories can travel beyond walls, across states, through the hearts of strangers. Whether you're in Los Angeles or Miami, a small town in Kansas, or the bustling streets of New York, this story, in some way, might be yours too. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about me. It's about what happens when promises are broken, when truth is delayed, and when love collides with reality. It's about the shadows that follow us until we finally turn around to face them. And trust me, the shadows are darker than you think. The spark of love. They say you never forget the moment you first meet the person who changes your life. For me, it wasn't fireworks or some grand cinematic moment. It was something quieter, something ordinary. And maybe that's why it meant so much. It was a Saturday afternoon in Austin, Texas. I was sitting at a small coffee shop, the kind of place where the smell of roasted beans lingers in the air long after you leave. I remember the low hum of conversations, the clinking of cups against saucers, and the sunlight spilling through the window like golden paint across the floor. And then she walked in. Her name was Emily. At least, that's what I'll call her now. She had this way of entering a room that wasn't loud or attention-seeking, yet somehow everyone noticed. Maybe it was the way her hair caught the light, or the confidence in her stride, or simply the quiet grace of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She ordered a latte, smiled politely at the barista, and took the seat across from mine because the shop was full. That was how it started. Two strangers, 2 cups of coffee, and the kind of conversation that makes time vanish. I don't remember every word we said, but I remember how she made me feel. Heard, seen. Like my jokes were funnier than they really were, like my stories were worth telling. By the time the coffee was gone, I knew I wasn't ready to let her walk out of my life. Our first dates weren't extravagant. We weren't dining at fancy restaurants or flying across states. Instead, it was late-night drives, stopping for milkshakes at roadside diners, walking through Zilker Park under the Texas stars, and laughing until our stomachs hurt. She had a way of turning ordinary moments into memories, and I found myself wanting more of them, more of her. Within a year, I was sure. I knew she was the woman I wanted to marry. People told me we were moving too fast, that love like ours needed time to settle. But when you're in it, when every glance, every touch, every laugh feels like home, you don't measure love by the calendar. You measure it by the way your heart races when you imagine a future together. And so, I asked her to marry me. I remember the tremor in my voice, the way my palms sweated as if the world depended on her answer. She cried when she said yes. Not the kind of tears you wipe away quickly, but the kind that spill over because your heart is too full to hold them in. That night, lying awake beside her, I felt a mix of triumph and terror. I had won her heart, but I had also given her a promise, not just of love, but of security. A husband is supposed to provide, to build, to protect. And that's when I repeated the words that would come to define everything. Don't worry, I already have a house. I said it with conviction, like it was the simplest truth in the world. She kissed me, believing every word. I told myself it wasn't really a lie, that renting was close enough to owning, that eventually I'd make it real. But deep down, I knew there was a difference, and I knew that difference mattered. Still, in that moment, the truth didn't matter. All that mattered was her smile, the way her arms wrapped around me, the way her voice whispered, "I can't wait to build our life together." Love is blinding like that. It makes you forget the cracks beneath your feet. It makes you believe that nothing could ever shake the ground you're standing on. And for a while, I let myself live in that illusion. For a while, it felt like the world was ours. Little did I know that the very words I spoke in love would one day echo back in a courtroom, twisted into something I never could have imagined. The illusion of stability. The wedding day felt like a dream, painted in gold. We chose a small chapel just outside Austin, surrounded by oak trees that had stood longer than any love story we could ever tell. The sun poured through the stained glass windows, coloring the room with shades of red and blue, as if heaven itself was blessing our vows. Family and friends filled the pews, their smiles wide, their eyes hopeful. I stood at the altar, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat that refused to settle. And then the doors opened. Emily walked in, her white dress flowing like water, her eyes fixed on me as though I was the only person in the world. In that instant, every doubt, every fear melted away. I wasn't thinking about bills, responsibilities, or the secret I still carried about the house. I was thinking about her, the woman who chose me, who trusted me, who believed in the promise of forever. When she reached me, she slipped her hand into mine and I whispered, "We're finally home." It was a line meant to comfort her, but in truth it was me trying to silence my own guilt. Because the truth about the house, the reality that it wasn't truly mine, hovered in the back of my mind like a shadow at the edge of the light. After the wedding, we moved into the house. She decorated every corner with her touch. Family photos on the walls, scented candles on the shelves, bright curtains that made the living room glow in the morning sun. It looked like ours. It felt like ours. And for a while, even I believed it was ours. Every paycheck I signed for rent, I told myself it was temporary, just a stepping stone, until I could make it real. Neighbors welcomed us with pies and handshakes, congratulating us on buying our first home. Each time I smiled politely, swallowing the lump of guilt that rose in my throat. Emily beamed with pride, introducing me as her husband, proud to show off the house she believed we owned. Watching her joy, I convinced myself that maybe the lie wasn't so harmful. After all, wasn't happiness what mattered most? We fell into routines quickly, morning coffees together before work, dinners at the kitchen table, weekend barbecues in the backyard. It was the kind of life I had always imagined, the kind of life movies and commercials sell as the picture of success. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were living the dream. And maybe in our own way, we were. But the illusion of stability is fragile. It doesn't take much for the cracks to appear. Sometimes it's a late payment notice. Sometimes it's an unexpected bill. Sometimes it's the unspoken tension that lingers in the air after an argument. Still, in those first years, I held on to the belief that love and routine could cover the truth, that as long as Emily was happy, I could keep pretending the house was ours. I thought I had time, that one day I'd save enough to buy it, or maybe another house, and she'd never have to know. Looking back, I realize how dangerous that thinking was, because a marriage built on illusions might stand for a while, but eventually the foundation gives way, and when it does, the collapse is devastating. For a time, though, everything seemed solid. We hosted Thanksgiving dinners in that rented home, filled it with laughter, and decorated it with Christmas lights that glowed against the Texas winter nights. We took photos on the porch, Emily holding mugs of hot cocoa, me with my arm around her shoulders. Those pictures told a story of permanence, a story of ownership, a story that wasn't true, and I told myself it didn't matter. That the love we shared was more important than a piece of paper proving ownership, that she didn't need to know, because as long as I kept paying the rent, we'd always have a place to call home. But secrets don't disappear just because you bury them. They wait, patiently, and one day, when you least expect it, they rise to the surface and demand to be seen. Back then, though, I didn't know that. All I knew was the warmth of Emily's smile, the comfort of our shared routines, and the fragile peace of believing we had built something permanent. I didn't realize I was living inside an illusion, one that would one day shatter louder than I ever imagined cracks in the foundation. At first, the arguments were small, so small they barely registered as cracks. A forgotten chore here, a sharp tone there. Nothing unusual for a married couple, or so I told myself. Every relationship has its ups and downs, right? That's what people say, but little disagreements have a way of multiplying, like hairline fractures in glass that eventually spread until the whole window shatters. I remember one night in particular. Emily had worked late at the hospital. She was a nurse, always on her feet, always giving more of herself than she had to spare. I had promised to cook dinner, but after a long day at the office, exhaustion got the best of me. When she walked through the door and saw takeout boxes on the counter instead of the meal I'd sworn I'd prepare, the disappointment in her eyes cut deeper than any words. "It's always an excuse with you," she said, her voice low, controlled, but sharp enough to pierce. I snapped back, tired and defensive. "I work too, Emily. You act like I'm not trying." It wasn't about the food, of course, it never was. It was about promises, about expectations, about the tiny failures that chip away at trust. And while the argument faded into silence that night, the residue of it stayed, unspoken, unresolved. Over time, silence became our most frequent visitor. We used to stay up late talking, sharing our dreams, our fears, laughing about nothing. Now, evenings passed with the glow of the television filling the spaces between us, both of us scrolling through our phones, pretending we were too tired to talk. I noticed the way Emily sighed when bills piled up on the counter, the way her eyes lingered on friends' social media posts of new homes they had purchased, families posing proudly with sold signs in front of freshly painted houses. Sometimes she would say things like, "One day, that will be us," and I'd nod, forcing a smile, while my stomach twisted into knots, because I knew the truth. That house we were living in, the one she decorated with so much love, wasn't ours. It never had been. And with every argument, every tense silence, I wondered how much longer I could keep the secret buried. Money became another battleground. Medical bills, car repairs, student loans. It always felt like we were one step behind. Emily accused me of not planning for the future, of living paycheck to paycheck without a strategy. I accused her of being too demanding, too critical, of never seeing how hard I was trying. The words we hurled at each other were like daggers, and each one left a scar. I started staying late at work, claiming deadlines, when really I just didn't want to face the tension at home. She started spending more weekends with her sister in San Antonio, saying she needed family time. In truth, she needed space from me. The distance grew, slowly at first, then faster, like a widening canyon neither of us knew how to bridge. I think the saddest part was how ordinary it all felt. We weren't screaming or breaking things. We were just drifting. The love that once filled every corner of the house was being replaced by something heavier, something colder. Resentment has a way of settling in quietly, like dust that gathers when no one's paying attention. And yet, through it all, I kept clinging to the illusion. The house, the marriage, the routines, we still had them, so maybe we were okay. Maybe the cracks weren't as bad as they seemed. I told myself lies, the same way I had told her lies, hoping that if I believed hard enough, reality would bend to my will. But reality doesn't bend. It breaks. One night, after another argument about money, Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes tired, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you ever feel like we're just pretending?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened, my chest heavy, because deep down, I knew she was right. We weren't just pretending about our marriage, we were pretending about everything. And the foundation we thought we had built together was already starting to crumble beneath our feet. A house filled with silence. The house that once felt like a sanctuary slowly transformed into a place I barely recognized. What had been filled with laughter, warmth, and the promise of a shared future became quiet, hollow, almost foreign. The walls, once covered in photos of trips, birthdays, and holidays, now seemed to echo the absence between us rather than our memories. I remember walking into the living room one evening, expecting to hear the hum of conversation or the gentle clatter of dishes. Instead, there was nothing. The television flickered silently, casting shadows across the empty furniture, and Emily sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of bills, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. It felt as though the house itself had absorbed the tension, turning it into a weight pressing down on every corner. We stopped having dinners together. Instead, we ate in separate rooms or grabbed fast food at odd hours, barely exchanging a word. Even weekends, once reserved for long drives across Austin or trips to the hill country, became silent. Emily would retreat into the bedroom with her laptop or phone, while I buried myself in work or video games, anything to escape the oppressive stillness. I think the most heartbreaking part was how normal it became. Silence doesn't roar. It whispers, insidiously. Over time, you stop noticing it, and it becomes a part of your routine, like the air you breathe but can't see. I would walk past her in the kitchen, and she would nod politely, a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I would nod back, both of us pretending everything was fine. But we both knew it wasn't. The house itself seemed to judge us. The hardwood floors creaked under our feet, the old windows rattled with every gust of wind, and every empty room reminded me of the distance we'd allowed to grow. Where once we had danced to music in the living room or built pillow forts in the den, now there were only shadows and echoes of what used to be. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing her soft breathing from across the room, wondering when it had gone wrong. How did we arrive at a place where we could live in the same house and feel entirely alone? I remembered the day we moved in, her laughter spilling through the hallways as she arranged the furniture. The contrast was unbearable. Even the little things that once brought joy became reminders of what we had lost. A mug left on the counter, a jacket draped over a chair, the way sunlight hit the living room couch. They all carried the weight of absence. Every day I felt the walls closing in, the silence growing louder, until it became almost unbearable. I started avoiding the kitchen, the living room, even the front porch. I found myself in the garage, in the backyard, anywhere outside the quiet oppression of the house. Emily did the same. We existed under the same roof, but lived in different worlds. Our conversations reduced to logistical necessities, bills, schedules, groceries. The love that had once sparked between us was now a memory, faint and painful. And still, I clung to the illusion of stability. I told myself that the house, even if it wasn't mine, provided some sense of continuity. That maybe, just maybe, if I held on long enough, we could patch the cracks, pretend the silence away, and return to what we had been. But silence doesn't heal, it reveals. It exposes the distance between people, the fractures that arguments alone could never touch. It reminds you that love, no matter how bright it once burned, can fade if nurtured only by appearances and empty promises. By the time we reached the end of that year, the house had become a monument to what we had lost. A physical space, yes, but more importantly, a reflection of the emotional void that had grown between us. And as I walked through each room, feeling the absence like a chill on my skin, I knew that no amount of effort or excuses could restore what had once been. Because sometimes a home isn't the walls, or the roof, or the furniture. It's the people inside it. And when they are gone, even if they are physically present, the house becomes nothing more than a hollow shell of memories. The breaking point. The breaking point doesn't arrive with a single thunderclap. It creeps in quietly, like water slowly eroding a rock, until suddenly you realize the foundation is gone. For Emily and me, it began with arguments that seemed trivial at the time, each one a small chip in the fragile glass of our marriage. It was a Tuesday evening in Houston, a rare night when both of us were home at the same time. The air was heavy with humidity, and the city's distant sounds, sirens, car horns, the hum of freeway traffic, felt louder than usual, as if echoing the tension inside our home. I came back from work exhausted, carrying a stack of paperwork, only to find Emily already sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills and letters. "I can't do this anymore," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, almost flat, but the words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Do what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady, though my heart began racing. "This, us, everything." It felt surreal. We had argued countless times before, but this wasn't just anger or frustration. This was resignation, the kind of deep, cold realization that sometimes love isn't enough. I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Every word I could think of sounded hollow, meaningless, like a weak bandage over a wound that refused to heal. We sat in silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but sharp and cutting. I could feel the distance between us stretching further, invisible but palpable. Emily finally stood, her shoulders stiff, her eyes brimming with controlled frustration. "I think we need to talk to a lawyer," she said. The words landed like ice in my veins. A lawyer. Divorce. The idea felt alien, impossible even. Yet there it was, sudden, undeniable, and terrifyingly real. For the next few weeks, the conversations were tense and careful, filled with questions about finances, living arrangements, and schedules. Each discussion felt like navigating a minefield. We tiptoed around our emotions, avoiding the raw truths that threatened to erupt. But no matter how careful we were, the tension never truly left. It settled in the corners of the house, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the words left unsaid over breakfast. Friends noticed the change. Family noticed the change. We didn't need to speak about it openly. Our moods, our body language, our distant glances were enough to tell the story. And yet we both clung to the idea that maybe, somehow, things could still be repaired. Maybe a weekend away, a heartfelt apology, or a simple reminder of better times could bring back what we had lost. But the truth is, once the foundation cracks, the damage spreads faster than anyone expects. The laughter, the shared dreams, the quiet intimacy, they all begin to feel like distant memories, like echoes from a past life. We were no longer partners, no longer a team. We were two individuals occupying the same space, moving around each other carefully, aware of how fragile everything had become. Then came the day she finalized the decision. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no doors slammed, no angry words hurled in the heat of passion. Just a quiet, deliberate choice that we could no longer continue. "I want a divorce," she said softly, almost mournfully. And in that moment, the reality hit me like a freight train. The life we had built, the house, the routines, the dreams of stability, was over. Not destroyed by a single event, but by a slow, inevitable unraveling that neither of us could stop. I wanted to fight, to salvage something, anything, but I knew deep down that it was too late. The love that once defined us had been replaced by frustration, disappointment, and the weight of unspoken truths. And the promise I had made about the house, already tenuous, now hung over us like a dark cloud, ready to ignite conflict in a way I hadn't anticipated. That was the breaking point. Not a moment of anger, but a moment of clarity. A moment where I realized that sometimes love alone isn't enough to hold a marriage together. And sometimes the secrets you carry, no matter how small they seem, can become the very reason everything falls apart. Divorce court drama. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and anxiety, a combination that made my stomach twist before I even stepped inside. I had never been in a situation like this before, not for myself, not for anyone I cared about. And yet, here I was, standing on the precipice of losing not just a marriage, but the life we had built, or at least the illusion of it. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting with her lawyer, her posture perfect, her eyes sharp. She looked calm, almost serene, as if she had rehearsed every step of this day for years. I, on the other hand, felt every heartbeat, every tremor in my hands, every second dragging me closer to the unknown. The judge entered, a tall man with a stern expression, softened slightly by glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He called the court to order, and suddenly the room seemed smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Our lawyers spoke first, formal and precise, outlining the reasons for the divorce, the division of assets, and the responsibilities that would follow. Emily's lawyer emphasized stability, long-term planning, and the house, a detail I had hoped to keep hidden for a little longer. When it was my turn, I swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. My lawyer presented my perspective, carefully avoiding the admission that the house wasn't mine, focusing instead on shared responsibilities, bills, and our history together. Every word felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, knowing that one wrong step could send everything crashing down. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see Emily's eyes flick to mine several times, a mixture of hurt and determination. I wanted to say something, to tell her the truth, but fear and guilt held my tongue hostage. What would she think of me then? Would she hate me more, or would she simply look at me with pity? Either way, the outcome seemed inevitable. Questions were asked about income, savings, the lease agreement, and the expenses we had shared. Each question was a minefield. My palms were sweating, my throat dry, and my heart hammered so loudly I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The air was thick with anticipation, each second stretching longer than the last. And then, the critical moment arrived. The judge asked about the property, the house Emily insisted she had a claim to. I braced myself. My lawyer, skilled and calm, explained that the property in question was not owned by me, but rented. I could see Emily's face shift, a flicker of confusion followed quickly by shock and disbelief. The room went silent. Every eye turned toward us, every breath held in anticipation. I don't understand, she said softly, almost whispering. I'm sorry, my lawyer replied. The property was rented. There is no equity or ownership to divide. Time seemed to slow as her face changed from shock to anger to a deep, aching realization. The house she had believed was hers, the life she had imagined, the shared investment she counted on, it was gone. And in that moment, I felt a complicated mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because the secret was finally out, sorrow because the revelation had broken her in a way I could never undo. The judge nodded, making notes on the file, his expression unreadable. Then it is settled, he said, final and heavy with authority. The property cannot be divided because it is not owned by either party. I remember the way Emily stared at me then, not screaming, not crying, just looking, the kind of look that penetrates your soul, the kind that burns into memory. In that moment, I realized the full weight of my choices, the lies I had carried, and the irreparable damage they had caused. Walking out of that courtroom, the sunlight felt different, harsher somehow. The air smelled of pavement and exhaust, a stark contrast to the warm, hopeful dreams we had carried in that house. Divorce had taken more than a building. It had taken years of trust, moments of happiness, and the illusion that love alone could solve everything. And yet, even in that heartbreak, there was a lesson waiting, one I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The secret revealed. The moment the judge's words sank in, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if trying to form words that refused to come. The house, the one she had believed was hers, was not legally ours. It had never been. And just like that, years of dreams, plans, and shared memories were suddenly reframed by a truth I had hidden for far too long. I could see the storm of emotions ripple across her face, confusion, betrayal, anger, and finally, heartbreak. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, to soften the blow, but the words lodged in my throat. How could I explain that I hadn't meant to deceive her, that my intention was never to hurt, yet the impact of my actions was undeniable? The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Even the rustle of papers seemed loud in the tension-filled air. The attorneys glanced at each other, the judge, and then back at us, recognizing the gravity of the moment. My lawyer cleared his throat, offering procedural explanations about property division, but they barely registered. Nothing mattered except the look Emily was giving me. A look that carried the weight of all the years we had spent together, now reframed by a secret I had kept. I can't believe this, she whispered, her voice fragile yet cutting. All this time, and you never told me. Her words pierced me, deeper than any legal judgment could. She wasn't angry about money or about the house itself. She was grieving the trust that had been broken, the foundation of our relationship that had been built on a lie. And I understood, painfully, that there was no way to undo that damage. I tried to speak, but the right words escaped me. Every attempt sounded hollow. The truth, what I had carried silently for so long, had finally erupted, and there was no softening the blow. Emily's vision of our life together, the future she had imagined, collapsed in an instant. The laughter, the holidays, the dreams of owning something permanent, it all felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Watching her process, the revelation was almost unbearable. She shifted in her seat, burying her face in her hands for a moment before lifting her gaze to me again. The look she gave me was not just disappointment. It was the culmination of years of subtle misunderstandings, hidden fears, and the realization that love, however strong, cannot always withstand deception. For a moment, I imagined the life we could have had if I had been honest from the beginning. A life built on transparency, trust, and shared responsibility. But that possibility had passed. Now all that remained was the aftermath, the consequences of my choices, and the lessons that would forever be etched in both of our hearts. As the court proceedings continued, I could barely focus on the technicalities of custody, finances, or agreements. My attention was consumed by Emily's presence, the weight of her disappointment, and the realization that a simple secret, kept perhaps with the best intentions, had fundamentally altered the course of our lives. Leaving the courtroom that day, I felt a mix of relief and devastation. Relief that the legalities were finally resolved, that the truth was out, yet devastation that the truth had caused irreparable harm. The house, our home, our sanctuary, had become a symbol not of love, but of the consequences of deceit. Driving away, I caught glimpses of Emily through the rearview mirror, distant and unreachable. I knew that this revelation would linger not just in the courtroom, but in our memories, our interactions, and in the quiet corners of the house she had once filled with warmth and hope. And yet, even in the pain, I realized there was a lesson to be learned. A lesson about honesty, the weight of promises, and the fragile nature of trust. The secret was revealed, yes, but with it came clarity, a brutal yet necessary truth that neither of us could ignore. Because sometimes, it's not the size of the house or the possessions we hold that define a relationship. It's the honesty, the trust, and the respect we carry for one another. And when those are broken, no structure, no matter how solid it seems, can withstand the storm. Picking up the pieces, after the courtroom doors closed behind us, Emily and I walked out into the sunlight of Austin, Texas, carrying more than just our personal belongings. We carried the weight of years spent together, memories both beautiful and painful, and the heavy realization that the life we had imagined was gone. The streets seemed both familiar and alien, a reflection of how our marriage felt, once vibrant, now distant and shadowed. The first days after the divorce were surreal. Our routines, once so intertwined, were abruptly severed. I walked into the empty house alone, the silence echoing louder than ever. Every room whispered memories I couldn't escape. The kitchen, where we shared late-night meals, the living room where we laughed at silly movies, the porch where we had watched sunsets while dreaming of a shared future. Now, it was just me and the emptiness. I realized that picking up the pieces of my life wouldn't be about replacing Emily or erasing the past. It would be about understanding it, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward without losing myself. The first step was acceptance, acknowledging my mistakes, the lies I had told, and the ways I had failed to protect the trust between us. It wasn't easy. Each acknowledgement felt like a small fracture reopening, a reminder of what I had lost and what I had caused. Friends became lifelines during this time. Late-night conversations over coffee at familiar diners, long walks along Lady Bird Lake, and even the simplest texts of, "How are you holding up?" were enough to remind me that life could still offer connection, even after heartbreak. Austin, with its warm streets and familiar faces, felt like a city of second chances, a place where I could rebuild, even if slowly. I also found solace in routines that had nothing to do with Emily. Morning runs through Zilker Park, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, and evenings spent reading on the porch allowed me to reclaim small fragments of peace. These moments, ordinary as they were, became pillars of stability in a life that had felt unsteady for so long. Therapy helped more than I expected. Talking through the guilt, the regret, and the lingering sadness with someone trained to listen without judgment offered clarity I couldn't find alone. I began to understand that growth often emerges from pain, that mistakes, while irreversible, can teach lessons about honesty, accountability, and the fragility of trust. Emily, I knew, was also picking up her pieces in her own way. Though I no longer shared her daily life, I saw her occasionally, moments that reminded me of the woman I had once loved. And I realized that letting go didn't mean erasing the past. It meant learning from it, respecting it, and allowing both of us the freedom to rebuild our separate lives. Slowly, I began to envision a future without Emily, not one filled with emptiness, but one defined by the lessons she had unknowingly taught me. Honesty, transparency, and the courage to face the truth became the foundations I promised myself I would carry forward. I started making plans, setting goals, and reclaiming a sense of autonomy I hadn't realized I had lost in the midst of our shared life. Most importantly, I learned to forgive myself, not to excuse my mistakes, but to accept that I am human, capable of both love and error. The weight of guilt can be paralyzing, but it can also be transformative if you allow it to guide your growth rather than imprison your spirit. Life after divorce wasn't easy, and some days still carried the sting of loss. But as I walked through Austin streets, feeling the warmth of the sun and hearing the familiar sounds of the city, I knew that I was moving forward. Every step, no matter how tentative, was a piece of my life being rebuilt, a testament to resilience and the human capacity to recover even from the deepest heartbreak. In the end, picking up the pieces isn't about forgetting what was lost. It's about creating space for what can still be gained. And as I moved forward, I understood that even broken foundations can lead to stronger, wiser, and more compassionate versions of ourselves. A lesson learned. Looking back on the years Emily and I spent together, I realized that life doesn't hand out lessons gently. They arrive through moments of heartbreak, through decisions we regret, and through the truths we can no longer hide. Our marriage, with all its love, laughter, and shared dreams, taught me more about honesty, trust, and the fragility of human connections than I could have ever imagined. The house, the central point of our conflict, was never mine. And yet it became the symbol of everything I had tried to protect and, simultaneously, everything I had jeopardized. I had thought that love alone could sustain a relationship, that shared routines and memories would outweigh the significance of property or financial truths. I was wrong. Emily taught me, in the hardest way possible, that honesty is the foundation of any lasting connection. Without it, even the brightest love can crumble. As I rebuilt my life, I began to notice the small lessons hidden within the pain. First, the importance of communication, not just speaking, but truly sharing intentions, fears, and realities. I had kept a secret, rationalizing it as harmless, and it had cost me the trust of the person I loved most. Transparency is not a weakness. It is a bridge, a means to create understanding and avoid devastation. Second, I learned about accountability. I had hoped that my actions could be excused or overlooked, that the narrative of "we're happy, so it doesn't matter" would be enough. But life has a way of holding us responsible, and sometimes the consequences are unavoidable. Accepting responsibility doesn't just alleviate guilt, it allows for growth, reflection, and the possibility of being better in the future. Third, I realized the value of self-awareness. I had buried my fears and insecurities beneath a facade of competence and stability. I had ignored the warning signs of conflict, brushed aside small cracks in the foundation, and assumed that love alone could compensate for human imperfection. The truth is that awareness of oneself, one's limitations, and one's responsibilities is essential to sustaining any meaningful relationship. Lastly, I understood that resilience is not simply enduring hardship, it is learning from it. Each day after the divorce was a step forward, a conscious effort to rebuild not just a life, but a character forged in fire. I discovered that healing comes in stages, that growth is gradual, and that embracing the lessons embedded in pain transforms what could have been a lifelong regret into a lifelong education. Emily and I are no longer together, but I carry her influence with me every day. She remains a reminder that trust, honesty, and respect cannot be taken lightly. She also reminds me that love, while precious, is not immune to human mistakes. And in carrying those lessons forward, I find a sense of purpose and clarity I didn't have before. I've rebuilt my life in Austin, reconnecting with friends, immersing myself in meaningful work, and taking time to explore the city's beauty. The quiet mornings along Lady Bird Lake, the bustling energy of South Congress, and the sunsets that paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples. These moments, seemingly ordinary, now carry extraordinary weight. They are reminders that life continues, even after heartbreak, and that new beginnings are possible. If there's one takeaway I hope anyone listening understands, it's this: honesty matters. Trust is fragile, and love is only sustainable when paired with transparency and accountability. Mistakes happen, but the lessons we extract from them can shape a wiser, stronger, and more compassionate self. The house may have been a symbol of deception, but it also became a catalyst for growth. Through its story, I learned the hard truths of love, marriage, and human imperfection. And while the pain of loss will always linger, it is tempered by the knowledge that I am more aware, more accountable, and more prepared to build something genuine in the future. Life is full of lessons, and sometimes they arrive dressed as heartbreak. But when we embrace them, we gain a wisdom that lasts far longer than the sorrow, a foundation sturdier than any house made of wood, walls, or steel, a foundation built of truth. Moving forward, years have passed since Emily and I walked out of that courtroom in Houston. Time, as it often does, has softened the sharp edges of memory, leaving behind clarity, perspective, and a quiet understanding of the lessons learned. The house, once the epicenter of our conflict, no longer haunts me as it once did. Instead, it has become a symbol, not of betrayal, but of growth. I've built a life that balances reflection with forward momentum. Austin has been a constant companion in this journey. Its streets, parks, and neighborhoods are filled with reminders that life continues, that beauty can be found even after devastation. Morning runs through Zilker Park, coffee at the corner cafe where the barista knows my name, and evenings watching the sun set over Lady Bird Lake. All these ordinary moments have taken on extraordinary meaning. I think about Emily often, not with anger or regret, but with understanding. We were two people who loved deeply yet imperfectly. Our mistakes, secrets, and miscommunications taught us truths we could not have learned any other way. She showed me that honesty is not optional, that trust is fragile, and that love, no matter how passionate, cannot survive without transparency. The lessons from our marriage shape my relationships today. I communicate more openly, I take responsibility for my actions, and I cherish the moments of connection that once went unnoticed. I've learned to recognize the cracks early, to address small issues before they grow, and to never take the presence of love for granted. Most importantly, I've learned that healing is not linear. There are days when the past feels heavy, when memories of conflict or heartbreak resurface uninvited. But even in those moments, I'm reminded that life is about progress, not perfection. Each day is an opportunity to live authentically, to honor the lessons we've endured, and to build something meaningful for the future. Looking back, I am grateful, not for the pain itself, but for the growth it inspired. The house that once represented deception now represents transformation. The heartbreak that once felt insurmountable now fuels resilience, self-awareness, and a commitment to honesty. And as I move forward, I carry one enduring truth. Life may not always unfold as we hope, but the lessons hidden within the struggle can guide us toward wiser, stronger, and more compassionate versions of ourselves. The past shapes us, but it does not define us. And in that understanding, there is freedom.